They say grief plays tricks on the mind, but no one ever warns you about the tricks it plays on the glass. For 6 months after the funeral, my own reflection was a stranger I learned to avoid. Then one morning, I looked in the mirror and saw my father's tired, disappointed stare looking back, and I understood that he hadn't truly left at all. The house hadn't changed, which was the problem. It stood just as my father had left it 6 months ago, a 3-story monument to a life meticulously engineered and just as meticulously concluded. Every object inside was an artifact. Every layer of dust, a stratum of memory I was there to excavate and discard. I told myself it was just a job, the final entry in the long, tiresome ledger of Richard Caldwell's estate. Liquidate the assets, fund the trip to study Iberian ruins, and finally be done with him. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a pressurized, waiting thing. It clung to the heavy velvet curtains and settled deep in the wool of the Persian rugs. My father had despised noise, and the house had learned to obey, holding its breath long after his own had ceased. I moved through the rooms with the careful steps of an archivist, cataloging furniture, boxing up papers, and finding pieces of a man I realized I'd never truly known. Here were his blueprints, every line drawn with an inhuman precision that left no room for error or life. Here were his books on structural integrity, their spines uncreased, their knowledge absorbed and ossified. There was nothing of my mother, of course. He had archived her out of existence years ago. It was in the upstairs bathroom on the 3rd day that it began. The room was cold, the air thick with the faint, medicinal scent of my father's old shaving soap. I was trying to wrestle a rusted-shut medicine cabinet off the wall, my hands slick with sweat and grime. I straightened up, catching my breath, and my eyes landed on the mirror above the sink. The silvering was flaking away at the edges, as if telling a ghost story by candlelight. The tone is slow, suspenseful, and atmospheric, with soft whispers and pauses that build tension. Imagine an old storyteller speaking in the dark, evoking mystery, fear, and curiosity. The emotion should shift between calm narration and chilling emphasis when describing supernatural moments. The silvering was flaking away at the edges, creating a dark, spreading blight across the glass. For a single, silent beat of my heart, the face looking back was not my own. It was his. Not the skeletal, paper-skinned man I'd last seen tangled in hospital tubes, but Richard Caldwell in his prime. The hair was dark and severe, the jaw was set like concrete, and the eyes, those eyes held the familiar, chilling weight of disappointment I knew better than my own reflection. It was a phantom superimposed over my features, a ghost in the glass. Then I blinked, and it was gone. It was just me, Leo, 32 years old and exhausted, with dust in my hair and a smudge of dirt on my cheek. Grief does strange things. That's what I told myself. It's a trick of the light, the tarnished glass, the sheer fatigue of dismantling a man's entire existence piece by piece. I splashed cold water on my face, the droplets clinging to my eyelashes, blurring the world. When I looked up again, there was only me. But the feeling of being watched, of being assessed, did not leave. It happened again the next day. I was carrying a box of his books past the long mirror in the downstairs hall. A flicker of movement in my periphery. A man in a crisp shirt, standing straighter than I ever have. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nothing. Just my own stooped, tired form reflected in the dim light. I started avoiding the mirrors after that, keeping my gaze low, focusing on the floorboards, the furniture, the endless boxes. But the house was full of treacherous surfaces. The polished mahogany of the dining table, the darkened glass of the grandfather clock, even the curved belly of a silver teapot. In each, I felt a presence just beyond the edge of sight. The face in the glass was no longer just a fleeting memory. It was an observer. The few times I dared to meet its gaze, I saw a subtle shift. The expression was no longer static, no longer just a photograph of a dead man's disapproval.
It had become vacant, almost placid. But when I would glance away and then force myself to look back, I'd catch the tail end of a new expression. It was a look of quiet, unnerving expectation, as if it were waiting for me to do something. Or perhaps waiting for me to finally see what it was showing me. It was no longer a matter of catching him in the glass. It was a matter of finding myself. The change was subtle at first, an insidious creep. The creases beside my eyes deepening into his cynical furrows, the slight downward turn of my mouth thinning into that familiar, unyielding line of his. I would stare, heart cold, trying to isolate my own features from the ones being superimposed, trying to hold on to the face I'd had just the week before. But it was like trying to separate mixed paints. The more I struggled, the more the two blended into a monstrous new whole. My work in the house ground to a halt. The trip, the archives, the life I was trying to build, it all seemed like a foolish dream from another person's life. My new occupation was avoidance. I learned the sightlines of the house, the angles of reflection. I draped sheets over the hallway mirror and the glass-fronted cabinets. I ate from paper plates to avoid the accusing curve of a spoon. At night, I worked with the curtains drawn tight, but even then, the black mirror of the laptop screen would catch the lamplight just so, and he would be there, watching me type with my own hands. His hands. The rain came on a Tuesday, a relentless, week-long downpour that turned the windows into weeping sheets of dark glass. There was no escape. Every pane held him. He was in the living room, distorted by the rivulets of water, his face melting and reforming. He was in the kitchen, a pale observer against the stormy gray of the backyard. I was a prisoner, besieged not by a ghost, but by an inheritance that was actively claiming the deed to my own body. The breaking point came in the upstairs bathroom, back where it all began. I had to go in there. I don't remember why. Maybe to get something? Maybe just from a morbid, self-destructive need to see how much of me was left. I stood before the tarnished mirror, my knuckles white on the edge of the porcelain sink. He was fully present now, the overlay nearly complete. My hair, my shirt, but his eyes, his contemptuous, possessive stare. A scream tore from my throat, a sound of pure animal terror. It wasn't his voice, it was mine, and the realization gave me a final fleeting surge of ownership. I snatched a heavy brass paperweight from a dusty shelf, one of his, a miniature of some brutalist building he'd designed. Without thinking, without breathing, I threw it at the mirror. The sound was a deafening crack, a gunshot in the suffocating silence of the house. The glass spiderwebbed, then collapsed inward, showering the sink and the tiled floor in a cascade of glittering shards. For a moment, panting, I felt a wild, exhilarating rush of victory. I had done it. I had broken him. Then I looked down. It hadn't banished him. It had multiplied him. 100 tiny eyes stared up at me from the floor. Each silvered fragment held a piece of his face, an eye here, the corner of a sneering mouth there. It was a fractured mosaic of his judgment, scattered at my feet. I had taken his singular, oppressive gaze and turned it into an army. I don't leave the house now. I sit here in the quiet, and I try not to look at my own hands for too long. Earlier today, I was staring at my right hand as it rested on the arm of a chair. The knuckles seemed broader, the fingers more solid, engineered, not grown. I felt a sudden, profound chill, a coldness that had nothing to do with the draft in this old house. It was the recognition that the face is only the beginning. The reflection is just the blueprint for the structure to come.
We often think of grief as something that fades, but this story leaves us with a chilling thought. What if it's an inheritance we can't refuse? It begins as a trick of the light, a flicker in the glass that we try to explain away. But it ends with the terrifying realization that the face we're becoming is the very one we fought so hard to escape. Thank you for listening to this story on Content Channel. Leo's final act of defiance was to shatter the mirror, but it only multiplied his torment. If you were in his place in that bathroom, at the very breaking point, would you have smashed the glass, or would you have walked away and tried to live with the man watching you? Take care of yourselves until next time. We'll be back soon with a story about a sound that only one person in a crowded apartment building can hear, and the terrible price of trying to prove you're not insane.